Welcome everyone to the CRC Roundtable, a monthly seminar series. I am Melissa Fagan, CRC's Career Development Program Coordinator, and I will be moderating today's webinar on behalf of Denise Wardrop, who is not able to join us today. If you're new to the CRC Roundtable series, our intention is to host targeted, inclusive, and informed conversations that match scientific advances and management needs. The webinars are designed for contribution, not consumption. So each seminar invites a diverse range of researchers, managers, and other professionals to have conversations around critical topics. The point of this is to build connectivity between all of us and to increase our collective competency for decision-making and give us a place to ask the clumsy questions with both bravery and humility. As a reflection of that intent, the panelists have been given about 25 minutes total to provide introductory remarks, allowing a full 30 minutes for discussion. These webinars are recorded and past seminars are available on the CRC website. So I would encourage you to review these, especially if you've missed some of the past discussions. As we begin, please feel free to type your name, organization, and location into the chat box so everyone can see today's webinar community. We also ask that you stay muted with your camera off while the speakers are presenting, but as we move into the discussion, if you'd like to contribute, please feel free to unmute and turn your cameras on. Denise always starts out by asking why this topic, why now, and why these speakers. So I'm going to attempt to address that related to today's discussion about the Farm Bill. As we all know, agriculture is one of the largest land uses in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The food produced here supports the growing population in the watershed and beyond, but production also leads to significant amounts of nutrients entering the bay. While food production and other agricultural programs are necessary, so is supporting farmland owners to reduce nutrient and sediment runoff into our waterways. Last signed in 2018, the current Farm Bill expires in September, and conversations about its next iteration are ongoing. The Farm Bill influences who farms and where, what production methods farmers use, and how profitable farm businesses are. Outside of the farming community, the Farm Bill impacts access to nutrition assistance, how safe our air and water is, and the stability of rural jobs and communities. The Farm Bill is a critical source of funding for conservation initiatives through programs like the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, and the Conservation Stewardship Program. It also supports farmer mentorship programs and peer-to-peer technical assistance to share field-tested ideas within the community that can benefit both farmers and the environment. We know this is a topic that people are passionate about and have a lot of questions about. And in fact, we've received a record number of questions in advance on this particular topic. So we are thrilled to spend some time focusing on the Farm Bill with you today. And we are very appreciative of our two speakers, Leon Tillman from USDA NRCS and Anna Kilias from the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Leon and Anna, I will gracefully let you know if we bump up against the time. And if you have materials that you're not able to share during the time limit, we will make that information available to others afterwards. So you'll see me come on camera. If we need to wrap up. And attendees, as we move forward with the introductory remarks, please feel free to add your questions to the chat as we go along. We know there's going to be a lot of questions, and there will probably be many that we don't get to during the webinar, but never fear. We will give the speakers time to address them afterwards and share the additional information with you in a follow-up email. With that, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Leon Tillman.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much, Melissa. Definitely appreciate the time and the opportunity to come speak and present today. And if I could very quickly get a thumbs up or a reaction just to make sure. Okay, thank you so much, Anna. So my name, as Melissa stated, I'm Leon Tillman. I am with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, and I serve as our Chesapeake Bay coordinator out of Annapolis, Maryland, and providing services across the entire Chesapeake Bay region for coordination of NRCS's conservation efforts in the Bay. Uh, Started with NRCS as an intern, and so I've been working with the agency for over 6 years, or I'm sorry, for over 16 years. And it's definitely been a pleasure to transition here from the Southeast and be able to learn and to implement conservation and be a part of conservation here in the Chesapeake Bay. And so I wanted to start with kind of an overview of the conservation title and looking specifically at the federal conservation programs offered and implemented by NRCS, and then also taking a closer look at the Bay investments and efforts that have been coordinated through NRCS and partners. So to kind of give a brief overview and looking at some of the programs, and Melissa did a great job providing an introduction to this, because looking at two of our flagship programs, one being our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, is one of our main and well-known programs that allows us to provide assistance to producers to implement targeted conservation on their land. And through this, we're able to address those specific natural resource concerns with the implementation of conservation practices. And through the EQIP program, we also offer various initiatives across the country. There are air quality initiatives, as well as land conservation initiatives, on energy initiatives, and several others. But I definitely want to take a moment to highlight our land conservation initiatives, as through that initiative itself, we have our national water quality initiatives, which allow for targeted watershed implementation projects. So where partners see a need to work and coordinate with their state leadership to be able to establish watershed projects and a technical plan for implementation of conservation within those watersheds, and then also to receive funding for the implementation of those practices within that specified watershed. And that is also the umbrella under which the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Initiative was under the 2008 Farm Bill. And then we also have our largest landscape conservation program. So our conservation stewardship program is the program by which we have implemented conservation on the largest number of acres across the country. Through this program, we're able to, one, reward our producers for great conservation stewardship as a way of pay for performance, but then also to move them to a higher level of conservation stewardship on those operations. So where we have producers that are doing a good job, doing well in their conservation effort, or even may just be learning, but they are still addressing resource concerns, we're able to identify and award them and reward them for that through financial assistance payments, but also then allow them to be able to increase that level of conservation stewardship, whether it's for wildlife habitat, water quality, erosion, or otherwise. And through that, being able to provide assistance as with similar to our EQIP program to offset some of those costs of that increased stewardship. And through both of these programs and through a number of our programs, we are addressing resource concerns. So that is a number of resource concerns across those listed on the slide here for our water quality, air, soil, wildlife habitat, as well as energy, and even some of those human concerns as well, making sure that operations are able to function economically. NRCS also offers the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, and that program is a partner-driven voluntary program. So where partners can then come to NRCS and with other partners to request funding for targeted projects. And with those targeted projects, you're able to implement conservation on private lands or within a specific geography as established by that partnership. It is eligible, the entities that are eligible include the private industry and non-government organizations. So again, having a lead partner, but able to also coordinate across those various entities that may so be desired or be able to also contribute to the conservation effort in the area. And just a little stat, in 2021, there were $330 million invested across 85 projects or RCPP projects that were either in or had a portion of their project area within the Chesapeake Bay watershed. So this is a program that is being widely utilized, and it's also one that as an agency, we're also looking, as we've heard feedback from partners on sometimes some of the difficulty in navigating that program, that our agency is evaluating to try to make it more customer friendly. And then also we work with our Farm Service Agency, one of our sister agencies, for the Conservation Reserve Program. And the Conservation Reserve Program is paid by the Farm Service Agency and provides rental payments for farmers to keep their operation in a vegetative state for 10 to 15 years. So taking that out of commodity crop production and putting that into vegetation. In exchange for removing that out of production, we're getting that wildlife benefit, also getting improved soil quality. So we're definitely happy to have those benefits, but we also get that improvement to our water quality as well as erosion and mitigating those climate change aspects as well. And so those are our foundational components for the programs implemented by NRCS, but we also have had requests and also receive additional funding for other initiatives and or funding through other legislation for these conservation efforts. And so here recently in our past fiscal year 2022, which concluded in September of 2022, we had an additional $22.5 million that were allocated specifically to the Chesapeake Bay through the Chesapeake Bay Partnerships Initiative. And that funding was allocated and used through our conservation title programs, specifically being our EQIP, CSP, and ASEP, which is our Agriculture Conservation Easement Program. Those programs were used to obligate and allocate that additional $22.5 million in financial assistance. So there's also technical assistance that is associated with that, but we were happy to have that money that we were able to use in the watershed, and in utilizing that money also, we garnered our partner feedback on what would be priority practices and priority areas for this funding to be utilized. Also, as part of the initiative, we did establish a federal crediting task force jointly with EPA. And part of that federal crediting task force is to look at opportunities to better and more fully credit federal agriculture conservation practices in the Chesapeake Bay. So through that initiative, established that federal crediting task force to more ensure that as we are providing this increased investment, we're making sure that also translates into the appropriate credits within the Chesapeake Bay program. And then also, I'm sure many have heard of the additional funding through the Inflation Reduction Act. And that funding was provided through, again, our existing conservation programs, so our EQIP, RCPP, CSP, ASEP, as well as I had mentioned technical assistance earlier. Conservation technical assistance is how we deliver essentially that taxpayer benefit. So taxes are being paid and we are a federal agency, and so we're allowed and able to, as producers would like us to go out on operations and provide assistance, guidance, recommendations to those that have interest at no cost. And then also part of the Inflation Reduction Act funding was to target these practices for climate smart mitigation activities that are going to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions and store carbon. So those are our priority practices. And we also have some practices that would be facilitating or supporting to those that we're also evaluating to ensure that we can get the widest adoption possible for those climate mitigation practices. And so what does that translate to as far as on the ground in the Bay? Looking across the Bay, our commonly implemented practices are nutrient management, as well as cover crops and fencing, which could be exclusion and or cross fence, and a number of practices addressing water quality as well as soil erosion within the watershed. Through the implementation and in doing this in partnership and coordination with the states across the Bay program has been able to meet those modeled loads, sediment reduction loads for the TMDL for 2025. And we're very happy to see that. But we also understand that part of the challenge in being able to identify the full effects of these federal conservation practices is as these practices are implemented in systems, it makes it sometimes difficult to fully quantify the reduction effects of those practices. And so again, that is in part of the workings of the Federal Crediting Task Force, as well as there's some opportunities that we could reevaluate some of the systems by which the crediting is being done to hopefully, again, in the future, more fully credit some of those practices. And then I also want to provide a video as well. NRCS has on our website Conservation at Work video series to highlight what these practices are, the various practices, and how they look, work, and provide benefits on the landscape. And then as well, through 2018 to 2020, NRCS had a Chesapeake Bay action plan that prioritized water quality, soil health, and fish and wildlife habitat with specific goals as far as acres of practices implemented to improve those resource bases, as well as looking to provide additional outreach and engagement to the public and also to technical specialists. And then just touching real quickly on the investment, NRCS, along when you look at it as well with FSA, has invested over $1 billion in conservation in the Chesapeake Bay for every 10-year period. We have also invested $297 million in technical and financial assistance over the last 3 years, and have averaged about $1.5 million per year investment within the Bay. And that is to, one, implement practices, as well as looking at those agreements with partners to get conservation implemented on the landscape, as well as even working with partners, other partners for monitoring efforts. And all of this, with all of this additional funding as well through IRA, NRCS, our states are also looking at ways to increase our technical capacity. So we are also doing hiring and again, evaluating agreements that we can make with partners to be able to provide additional technical assistance to our customers and our farmers out there. And that will conclude my presentation. I will turn it over to Anna, and we will likely take questions at the end.
Thanks, Leon. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you all see a slide. Awesome, thank you. So I am gonna pick up from where Leon has kind of laid that background and talk a little bit more about the 2023 Farm Bill specifically, and some of the priorities that have been expressed from different partners within the work to our congressional delegation and to the leaders of that negotiation as they form the next reauthorization of these programs. Let's see. First, a little bit of context before I jump in on why the Farm Bill is so important for our Chesapeake Bay goals. Not to say that Leon didn't make the point already, but I love these pie charts, so I'm going to share them again. If you look at where the jurisdictions anticipate future pollution reductions coming from, it's going to be the agriculture sector in the future. Much of the progress to date has come from wastewater treatment upgrades, which won't be as available a strategy in the future. Ag has been an important part of our progress so far, but looking at what the state water quality implementation plans say about where we will get our future reductions, 87% of the remaining nitrogen reductions are planned to come from practices on our farmland. So the ag sector will be a huge part of our future success, and the Farm Bill's conservation programs are going to be a large part of whether that success is possible. And just to put a finer point on it, we need to make that success happen and put these practices in place, even as the number of animals within our watershed continue to grow and our farmers are being asked to produce more on fewer acres while we pick up the pace of conservation practice implementation. So we've got quite the job ahead of us, but the Farm Bill is a big part of making it as easy and attractive as possible to get the work done. Just to kind of set up the priorities that I'm going to walk through in a second, most of these are going to be based on this three-legged stool of agricultural conservation, right? You have to have the funding in place, the technical assistance to help implement the conservation practice, and then the programs and the conservation practices themselves. And you have to have all three of these working at their best to be successful. The Farm Bill offers us opportunities to make improvements across all three of these areas based on the successes and the challenges that we've experienced over the last 5 or 10 years, kind of taking those lessons and turning them into proposals to make the next Farm Bill work even harder for farmers in our watershed. So these are the 6 priorities that the Chesapeake Bay Commission and some of our partners have kind of coalesced around for the 2023 reauthorization. I'm taking the opportunity to present at a high level all 6 of these, but I'm not going to profess to be an expert on all, if any, of the ideas here. They have been created by minds that have been working on this much longer than I have, by partners that have been in the weeds on some of these. So, you know, this is just to kind of put in front of you some of the core priorities that the Bay's congressional delegation has been asked to prioritize, and that the leaders of the agricultural committees have been asked to look at to help push our efforts within the Chesapeake Bay watershed further. But like I said, not all of these are commission created ideas. They're really just the ideas that all the partners have kind of come around and put forward. So I'll read them off, right? I've talked about them, but I haven't read them. So first, maintain funding. Second, codify the Chesapeake States Partnership Initiative. Expand workforce development opportunities, improve CRP, CREP, and EQIP, include a turnkey pilot program for CREP, and then reduce barriers to invasive blue catfish processing. So on the funding side, funding levels for our Farm Bill programs typically follow historical trends, but not necessarily the environmental needs of the state or the region. And looking at the historical funding levels for the Bay jurisdictions, in particular Pennsylvania, we have much greater needs than what we've been able to secure so far. And if we plan on meeting our goals and getting much more out of the agricultural sector in the future, then we'll need to look at meeting those needs through our funding levels. On average, $173 million per year currently comes to the Chesapeake Bay watershed through our Farm Bill conservation programs. And the Chesapeake Bay Commission has estimated that we need an additional $73 million per year for 10 years through supplemental appropriations on top of that average annual amount in order to fully fund just the federal share of our agricultural conservation practices called for in the WIPs. So that's what the Chesapeake Bay Commission called for when we proposed the Chesapeake Resilient Farms Initiative. And that's what we hope will come out of the Chesapeake Bay States Partnership Initiative. So securing those supplemental dollars. We also know that, as Leon touched on, the IRA provided supplemental funding over a period of time, which will be in addition to the Farm Bill funding. So one of the big questions facing Farm Bill negotiators is how to treat that IRA funding. Our goal is to keep it in place, keep it supplemental, don't allow it to get maybe rescinded and reallocated to other priorities. That's going to be quite an attractive option when you're trying to fund so many really important activities and you know you're not allowed to really go above existing funding levels. So we have to make the case really strongly that all of that funding is necessary, even the supplemental funding. It really can't move to other priorities because these are already oversubscribed programs and we can really make use of it within our watershed. So we'll continue to make that point, but we need both everything we've gotten and more moving forward. Also kind of within the funding leg of the stool is the Chesapeake Bay States Partnership Initiative. Leon already touched on the funding that's already come through that initiative, but our hope is that it continues to funnel additional funds, supplemental funds into our region to meet the federal share of the need. So we are proposing that the Farm Bill codify the Chesapeake Bay States Partnership Initiative within the language so that it continues to be an initiative moving forward that has the support of USDA and our appropriators. Next is workforce development. So if you have all of this money, including the supplemental money, all coming through over the next 5-10 years, that's 40% above what we currently see. And that means we need more boots on the ground in order to implement these practices and work with farmers to get this money spent. We need a robust and qualified workforce to fill these positions over time. And from the commission standpoint, we need to be building that workforce now. We are proposing new provisions in the research and extension and rural development titles that would basically expand existing programming for grant programming to allow for not just four-year institutions, which a lot of them, that's what they focus on right now, but two-year institutions, community colleges, technical institutions, all of these other programs, even high schools, to be able to access these dollars to put into workforce development, particularly work-based learning. So those paid internships that get students out in the field, learning those soft skills about how to work with farmers, how to do this work, why this work is important. And so hopefully they enter the pipeline and will continue to get the skills they need and stay in the work to help us get these practices implemented over time. So the three grant programs listed here are the ones that we're hoping to expand to include more institutions and work-based learning opportunities. Improving CRP, CREP, and EQIP. Kind of first among these, I would say, is explicitly stating that states can accept any new Farm Bill incentives that are added to this Farm Bill and the last one, like riparian forest buffer management payments, by amending their existing state CREP agreements without negotiating an entirely new agreement. That was one of the problems that we've seen since the 2018 Farm Bill. New initiatives, new policies came into play, but states didn't necessarily want to open up their existing contracts to pull those in and risk what they'd already negotiated so far. So some things have been left on the table that really could be doing some good work. So putting in some really explicit language that says you can adopt these amendments, there's a fast track for them, particularly for the Chesapeake Bay restoration work, and get these working on behalf of our farmers faster. There are also proposals that would allow CRP to include cropland, marginal pasture land without showing cropping history to kind of reduce one barrier to getting land enrolled. And then for EQIP, prioritizing grazing practices and really prioritizing producers that have CREP applications where they're trying to do a system-wide approach to the conservation work on their farm. And it would be helpful if they could get CREP and EQIP kind of working at the same time. There's also a proposal to include a new pilot program, often called a turnkey pilot program for riparian forest buffers. Our state watershed implementation plans call for a really strong uptick in forest buffer implementation as a strategy to meet our water quality goals, as you can see in the chart on the slide. The turnkey pilot program would allow for a third party under CREP to come in and help simplify the process for the producer. They would take on the design, installation, and maintenance of the riparian forest buffer. The producer wouldn't have to put the cost of these practices up front. The funding would kind of stay with USDA and move through to the third party, but the producer would keep the rental payment for the practice. So kind of simplifying the process, making it easy for the producer to say, yes, I want to do this, by taking away some of the barriers that we've seen in implementation so far. And this is all based off of a successful model being run in the James River watershed with the James River Association, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and Virginia Department of Forestry. So just using that model to create the opportunity for a larger pilot program. And then finally, on the proposal side, the priority side, invasive blue catfish. So these were introduced into the non-tidal portions of Virginia's rivers to create a recreational opportunity, thinking that they would stay in those non-tidal portions. Unfortunately, the blue catfish have turned out to be much more resilient to salinity than we thought, so they traveled throughout the Chesapeake Bay. And that's a big problem because they don't have a natural predator in the area. They just kind of eat everything they can find. So they're putting a lot of pressure on the ecosystem, on the resources we do rely on some of the really high quality commercial and recreational species that make the Chesapeake Bay so iconic. One study showed that they could make up as much as 75% of the biomass in the James River. So once introduced, they really kind of explode in population, and they're putting a lot of pressure on our watermen and our coastal economies. One barrier to kind of improving the market for an invasive wild-caught blue catfish industry in the Chesapeake Bay, to kind of create a market for taking these catfish out of the water, is that it is harder for processors to meet the regulatory requirements. All other seafood is processed under the FDA's Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points program. Blue catfish are unique in that they have been removed from that program, and they are currently overseen by the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service. So a processor that wants to process multiple types of seafood, including blue catfish, they have to follow 2 different regulatory regimes, and that's a burden and a barrier and a cost. So we are looking for ways to reduce that barrier to entering this industry and growing this industry throughout our Bay region, targeting invasive blue catfish, wild-caught invasive blue catfish. One option is to transfer that primary regulatory oversight from USDA back to FDA. Another option, which is currently in the Agriculture Appropriations Bill from the House, is to create a waiver system. So a processor can request for the USDA to waive oversight, assuming and requiring that they are following the FDA regulatory requirements already. So some options on the table. This is a tough one to get across the finish line because of regional needs throughout the country, but an important one for our watermen and for the Chesapeake Bay region. And then finally, I just kind of want to touch on the prospects for getting a farm bill at all soon. So what do we know about the process so far? The House and Senate Agriculture Committees, they have solicited requests and recommendations from their members and from the public. The Commission and other stakeholders have encouraged the congressional delegation to submit requests on everything that I've touched on so far. The Senate Agriculture Committee still has their public recommendation kind of platform up, so you can go type in any recommendations you have for them to consider. Both Chairwoman Stabenow, the Democratic Senator from Michigan, and Chairman G.T. Thompson, the Republican representative from Pennsylvania, they have both expressed their hopes and intents for an on-time bipartisan reauthorization. And the bipartisan nature of farm bills has kind of been their hallmark for a very long time, but it's going to be difficult for a number of reasons this year. Conservation title has our focus today, but to put in context, I wanted to put this graph in front of you to show the elephant in the room, which is the nutrition title. That it takes up a lot of the funding from the farm bill. It takes up a lot of the attention in the debates. It's kind of going to show the fault lines between the chambers, the parties, the members. So that's going to take up a lot of time and make it difficult to negotiate a bipartisan bill quickly. And then my last point will be that Congress has a lot on its to-do list and not a lot of time. So after they leave DC this week. They will go on a 2-week recess, and then they have 12 session days in July to get through a National Defense Authorization Act and appropriations bills, some of them. And then they will leave for a month, and then they will come back for another 12 days to get through the rest of the appropriations bills and a farm bill potentially, and funding the government. So they have like 24 session days to get through all of this work. That is a lot to get done, including a farm bill somewhere in there. So it's just kind of goes to show that this is going to be tough. It's going to take a long time. So I will end there, and hopefully we have good questions.
Thank you so much, Leon and Anna, for your remarks. It really helps to sort of set the stage of what some of the priorities are that are advancing for the Farm Bill update, and then just exactly what we're seeing on the ground in terms of some of the programs that are being supported by the Farm Bill. We do have a couple of questions already, and folks, please keep entering them in the chat. We will get to as many as we can today. And you know, the Farm Bill topic is large and vast, and we may not have all the answers. There might be others who are participating on the call who does, and so we'll just make this a true discussion and see how much information we can share amongst each other. So our first question is, does the effort to improve CRP, CREP, and EQIP include putting stronger payments incentives in place for practices that provide multiple benefits? We keep hearing from farmers that incentives drive up the signups, and if we want more habitat and other outcomes to be considered beyond cover crops, intentional effort to stack payments and incentives for those other ecosystem services may make a difference. And I'll add on to that the incentivizing multiple benefits was also a question that was asked in advance. So I think there's a lot of interest in learning how that might be visioned in this new update.
So I'm not sure if this is, the context of this is in through kind of the current Farm Bill or the new Farm Bill, but I will speak to kind of what there is currently. Is though the payment rates are established in the Farm Bill in the law. So for what NRCS is able to provide, those are established by the Farm Bill. So any adjustments to those would have to work through the legislation.
There is a proposal to increase the payment limit for CREP, to double the payment limit, but I don't know about proposals to further incentivize practices with multiple co-benefits. I haven't heard of anything kind of tangible along those lines.
I will share just in from the incentive standpoint, some of the states have tried to work with partners in order to greater incentivize some of the CRP and CREP buffers. Coordinating with partners so that there is another payment source from another partner to be able to provide more of an incentive for that adoption, but it's not through a federally funded avenue.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of related questions in the chat. Is there any effort to more closely align land conservation as a piece of the planned improvements to the programs?
I guess I'm trying to understand that, because from NRCS's perspective, we're looking at those resource concerns and resource issues related to land conservation, and how we make those funding decisions and how we prioritize our projects is looking at all of the resource issues that would be addressed on that operation or through that work. So it is land conservation based and looking at multiple improvements, as many improvements as we can get through coordination with that operator or that producer.
Mm-hmm. And I should say the priorities I've highlighted are kind of the ones that we think might be part of a very Chesapeake Bay specific marker or like kind of policy proposal, but there are tons of other groups that are working on other more far-reaching policy proposals that don't aren't necessarily meant to just impact the Chesapeake Bay. And so I've heard other proposals about programs like ASAP that would do more on the easement or land conservation side. I just don't have those in front of me.
Great, thank you. And Leon, you mentioned prioritization of resource allocation. Do you have any information that you can share about how that prioritization is done to achieve the highest conservation return on that investment?
Yeah, so each of the states have state technical advisory committees that are open and coordinate with partners as well. And so each of the states gets feedback from what would be, whether they're priority areas, priority resource concerns and or practices from that state technical advisory committee, as well as at our local level. So where we implement our programs, at that county level, we have local working groups that are open to the public, and those are publicly announced so that we can have those in the ag community and in the public come in and provide those same recommendations as far as priority practices and focus within that county area. So we utilize those tools and get that feedback from our partners and from the local producers and customers to drive what is being prioritized across our programs.
Thank you. Another question from the chat. Are we still asking the farmer to pay up front for ag BMPs without an on-farm benefit and then get reimbursed after the BMP is installed? Seems to be a large ask.
So I will take that one. I'm not sure about the on-farm benefit portion of that question, because when we are providing financial assistance, there is always going to be an on-farm benefit as far as a resource concern being addressed. So again, to kind of go back through that list, whether it's soil, water, air, plants, animals, even human and energy, if there's any benefit that will be garnered from the implementation of those practices, there will be an on-farm benefit. We do ask that producers, and we are still asking that producers provide that payment upfront, and our payments are made reimbursable, except for in the instance if they are in a certain group or a certain type of producer, they can request an advance payment. So they can get a portion of what would be the estimated final payment. They could get a portion of that to help offset some of that cost, some of that upfront cost to implement the practice. Also, there are, and we've been working with EPA in some instances, as well as other partners and even FSA in some instances, where customers can get loans to cover that upfront cost and then be able to utilize the financial assistance payment thereafter to repay that loan. So it is how it's set up in the Farm Bill for those payments to be reimbursed payments to the customer. But there are some avenues in that language as well that allow us to make those advance payments in specific situations to help offset that cost for certain groups.
And I'll just add that I think that's getting at that problem is one of the goals of that pilot program I touched on, to try to avoid having the producer have to put those funds up front, by keeping the responsibility and the work with the third party who's going to help facilitate the practice.
Great, thank you. One of the questions that was submitted in advance of the webinar was interested in exploring a little bit more about how both climate change and equity concerns are showing up either in the discussions related to the update, or then also, Leon, I'm assuming that these programs are evolving over time as some of these other priorities come out, and both climate and equity are issues that the Bay program is focusing on and trying to incorporate across all of their other initiatives. So I'm just curious if you could each sort of touch on from what you're seeing from your perspectives about climate change and equity being addressed.
So I guess I'll start. That climate change as well as equity, so diversity, equity, and inclusion are top priorities for USDA. So for the secretary, as well as for the chief of NRCS. And what we've done to that piece is establishing that diversity and equity and ensuring that it always being considered in our program delivery. So reevaluating our outreach that we are conducting to make sure that everyone, those that may be minorities in poor areas that we may not even have traditionally worked with or even heard of NRCS, trying to get the word out to them. So states are establishing strategic plans to be able to conduct that outreach to those groups. As well as, and I'm not sure if many realize, there is part of the Farm Bill that does designate a specific portion of financial assistance funding going to historically underserved producers. So looking at there's a designation for a specific percentage of funding to go to our minority groups, limited resource farmers, beginning farmers. And so that is part of also one of our continuous efforts. And then also on the climate piece, we are looking at that and prioritize that to identify those practices that have the greatest climate benefit as far as reducing our greenhouse gases as well as carbon sequestration. And also going back on our scientific and technology side and working with those partners to ensure that we have the latest research and evaluating other practices that may have that benefit and trying to prioritize those. And so what we're seeing currently through our IRA funding is, with that being a target for that funding is going specifically to those type of practices to make sure that we can facilitate and increase the adoption of those climate smart practices.
Just to add a little bit on the politics side, the climate smart practice has been of discussion by the various leaders of the ag committees. It's one of the things that they're kind of grappling with, because there's some partisan feelings about how the IRA dollars are spent and where they should go, including, what does it mean to be a climate smart practice? So that is part of the discussion about total funding dollars, whether we rescind IRA dollars and move them elsewhere. It's kind of a swirling conversation on that front, and I think everyone's handling it somewhat delicately, but also there's just a lot of on the ground evidence of the impacts of this too. So it's a question, it's a partisan question at times, but it's a continuing conversation.
Great, thank you. Another question from the chat. Do either of you know of any good examples of third-party riparian forest buffer pilot programs that are already in practice?
So I just dropped a link to the one that this turnkey pilot is based on or kind of inspired by, and that's the James River Buffer Program in the James River watershed. For additional details on how this pilot would function, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is taking the lead on running this particular policy priority through Congress. So I will work with them to try to get you their details, but I don't want to, it's not my idea, it is their great idea. And so I'll talk with them.
Great, and there's an additional request to share any resources or RFPs or websites that direct you to that turnkey program. I know that you've put that in the chat. We can also share some additional resources in the follow-up email that will go out after this webinar. So Anna and Leon, if you have any links you can send over to us, we'll be sure that all of those are sent out to all of our webinar participants today as well.
Thank you. And I'll also add there, Melissa, just kind of an FYI. I know NRCS has been working with partners and to kind of go back to the RCPP program, that Regional Conservation Partnership Program, where there has been a priority for some of those projects to implement riparian forest buffers. I don't have the information on kind of the progress of each specific project, but what I can do is I can share the link to the RCPP page that folks can go in and kind of look at those projects, and it should list those lead partners if folks are interested in following up.
That would be great. Thank you so much. And one of the other questions that came in ahead of time, and I think, Anna, you mentioned it briefly in some of your opening comments, but folks are wondering, where is there any kind of, draft language available or resources that show what's up for consideration? Are there opportunities to engage, and what are those engagement points? If there's any information that you have about how folks can sort of engage in the process at this point, we'd love to hear that.
No drafts. I don't think we expect to see a draft of a bill until maybe September after Labor Day. My understanding is that the ag committees are kind of reaching out to members within Congress to kind of talk through the priorities or the requests that have been made. So they're kind of feeling out the ideas and maybe, putting pencil to paper themselves. But there's nothing for us to look at and to reflect upon just yet. The best way to kind of make sure you're being heard or that you're engaged is to share your thoughts with your member of Congress, because they have put their requests in, but they will continue to kind of elevate their priorities throughout this process. There are a couple of folks within our watershed that are on these committees and are in a prime position to affect the bill. So make sure you touch base with those offices, because they're probably best positioned to get that policy proposal through. And then just follow the two ag committees websites closely to figure out when they post language or information or ways for you to keep track of what's going on.
Great, thank you for that. One of the themes that appeared in both of your introductory remarks was centered on workforce development, and that is a topic that the Bay program is currently looking at. There's a funded project that is starting to do a landscape assessment, asking the various goal teams and work groups what their workforce needs are, if they are engaging in certain programs to fill those needs. Do they even know of different workforce development programs that they can engage in? So it was great to see that appear in both of your comments as something that you are focusing on and advancing for recommendation and trying to incorporate. My question is, are there specific areas that you're targeting for where those workforce development dollars are most needed, or is it more a general just expansion of the workforce?
So our particular proposal on workforce development, it would be money and opportunity in those grant programs. Those grant programs are open everywhere to everyone. So there would be that follow-up of having to convince the institutions and folks within our region to go try to get those dollars and bring them into the watershed to produce these programs, including work-based learning programs. So it is very much a countrywide, nationwide opportunity, and then we would have to go vie for those dollars after the fact.
Okay, great.
And as for NRCS, with us hiring to meet, again, that increased need, both technically and financially, that we're charged to deliver, we understand that we need to deliver training and education to our new hires, as well as many of the partners that we're working with are also increasing their capacity. As IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law came with funding for a plethora of other agencies. And so with so many folks that are looking to access this money, we are also working with partners, and when we are having training, opening up to them as part of our action plan that we had as a priority before, and we continue to kind of work towards, is making sure that we're engaging our public, but also providing that training, and that training is open to our NRCS staff as well as our partners, because we often will have those with the soil conservation districts, those with other sometimes private nonprofits and environmental organizations that attend as well to get training on whether it's addressing grazing issues, looking at soil erosion issues out on the landscape. So that is something that is an integral part of our conservation delivery and that we use and deliver through our conservation technical assistance funds.
Great. Thank you both. I think everyone will be sort of paying attention to workforce development moving forward and how can we prepare to accelerate our progress and improve some of our programs with that in mind. We're coming now to the end of the session. I want to give both Leon and Anna the opportunity to offer any closing remarks or final thoughts. So Leon, maybe we'll start with you and then move over to Anna.
Well, thank you, Melissa. And I guess I'll start again with definitely appreciating the opportunity to come and speak today. The Farm Bill and the conservation that is implemented through it is definitely one of those things that NRCS takes a lot of pride in. We are still invested, although it is not a codified, as Anna alluded to, it's not codified in the Farm Bill. We are still prioritizing that conservation within the Chesapeake Bay. It's still one of our critical conservation areas. So there are opportunities where partners can request that any project funding specifically within that area. And again, we're always looking to work with our partners to make sure that we're meeting that need, getting that local input, and able to meet the needs of the diverse customers and partners that we have across the Bay. So always looking to, and if there are any questions, folks can feel free to email me and I can put them in contact with specific points of contacts within specific states or across the various states so that we can continue to work together and meet the needs of our customers, producers, and the resource base here across the Chesapeake Bay.
And I guess I'll conclude with kind of a thank you, because a lot of the work that's been done within the watershed, a lot of the really successful work has produced some really positive statements from members of our congressional delegation, including Chairman Thompson, on the importance of conservation programs in the Farm Bill. So, you know, the impact of these programs is being felt and being heard, but there's a lot outside of what we work on that will determine the success of the Farm Bill. So we have to be patient while being present, make sure that our priorities are ready for them to work and act upon. But a lot is gonna depend on things that we have no control over. So we'll kind of cross our fingers and stay positive and stay aware of all those dynamics.
Great. Well, thank you again to you, Leon and Anna. I'm sure that as the Farm Bill is moving forward, you're getting a lot of requests for your time. So we really appreciate you giving us this hour so we could dig into some of the details. And thank you to all of our attendees. We appreciate your time as well. And we hope that you will join us for our next webinar, which will be focusing on the Chesapeake Bay report card, and that will be held July 19th. So look for registration information to come out to your inboxes soon. Again, thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next roundtable.